rabbis weren't able to refute Christianity because in order to do so, they would have had to forfeit their own Babylonian buldinkis, which they weren't willing to do. But I'm willing to do it. So in this video, please God, we're going to talk about the real truth about Torah and how it works and what's really going on. I decided to keep the window open so that my friend the moon, see the moon, can take part in the stars of this video. We need to talk seriously about what is going on in our reality, why it's going on, how it's going on, because things are getting real. I've been revealing this stuff stage after stage so as not to blow people away with too much. Also, I know that these events are going to be unfolding, so I want you to see what's going on in reality, and then you'll see what's happening outside your window and make what I'm saying make more sense. Torah is terror. There is absolutely nothing mystical in Judaism, in real Judaism, that is in the prophetic original school of Judaism. We don't deal in mystical stuff at all, spiritual stuff. We have two phases of reality. We have God reality, which is uncreated, absolute in and of itself. And then there's the translation of God's will into actual reality. In fact, if Torah is learned correctly, there aren't even abstract concepts in Torah. Everything becomes really real and infinitely real. The reality that we are living in is the female aspect of God. This is Earth. Earth is much more comprehensive than we've been led to believe. Earth actually encompasses the entire creation, and the entire creation is within Earth. They are mutually contained and containing, one in the other. And she is God's consort. God created a creation, an image of itself in the sense of it being the actual representation, the actual building, the actual being of God's will. This is the female concept of God. So the divine couple is Ein Sof, uncreated, that is the unending one, the ineffable, the incomprehensible, uncreated, and then his mate, who is the ineffable, the incomprehensible, everything that God is, but created. And clearly that's a higher level. God took what was only possible in the uncreated and made it into the created, and her name is Earth. Torah is the vehicle by which that can occur. Torah acts as the interface, the template between the uncreated and the created. In a sense, it's also a shield. It protects the inception, which becomes the actuality, from being obliterated, protects it from the influx. In the exact same way that the placenta shields the embryo. In fact, the word HaSefer, which means the book, is equal to the word Shilia, which means placenta. It is also equal to the name Moshe, Moses. Moses is that which receives the holy inception, transcribes it, and then it becomes reality gradually, because if it were to go in one boom, it would shatter the reality. There has to be a protection mechanism in place. Again, going back, the Hebrew word for book, which is not a good translation, is sefer. Safar, mispar, is number. Lesaper is to tell a story, to relay. Safar is a frontier. You should be hearing the words spore and sperm. The book of Torah is God's sperm, which contains all of the quote-unquote DNA necessary to transcribe worlds, infinite worlds, all worlds. In order for that sperm to be transcribed, it has to fall onto a fertile field. That fertile field that takes that sperm and is able to decode it into realities is the female. That is the conjugation of God and God's wife. God's sperm is received by the consciousness of those who love God. In their mind, the holy conception, the holy inception grows, and through them it becomes realities. The rabbis did not like the fact that this was a primarily female process. They wanted to do it as males. And to that purpose, excuse me, I'm having asthma attacks. To that purpose, they tried to hush the female. One of the gematriot for Yerushalayim is 1156, which is the same thing as 157, which is nekeva, which is female. Jerusalem is female. Eretz, earth, is female. The rabbis didn't like this. They wanted to hush up the female and take over that process and make it a purely intellectual, abstract idea. They wanted to be in Babylon with their hanging gardens that I talk about all the time. They wanted to entertain beautiful ideas, but not bear the pregnancies and the responsibilities and the birth pangs of the actual creation. It caused all kinds of distortions in reality, and reality is not quite reality because men cannot bear in the same way that the female can. There's some ability to get it through their mind, but it doesn't get really real. So First of all, we have to understand that the sperm cell is not the baby. People treat Torah as either it's to be taken literally as such as it is, or to be understood symbolically, or to be disregarded entirely. All three of those approaches to Torah are completely in error. The correct way to understand Torah is as a sperm cell. Allow it to fertilize our consciousness and begin to unpack the information that's contained in that sperm cell and turn it into actual organic realities. So we have to understand that the DNA in the apple seed is not the apple. It's not the apple tree. People think that prophecy is, well, I read it in the Bible in a fourth generation translation, and then I'm supposed to see it out there the way it's written. No, you don't understand how to unpack that because you don't have the Hebrew plus the correct intentions. We have to have both. Torah is a landscape. It is like every other landscape. Some of the fruits are available on the surface. For some things we have to dig. And if you want to get to the coconuts, you have to climb. In all of those places in which Torah appears to be talking about anything negative whatsoever, if the reading of Torah is in any way harsh or bitter, it's because we have not yet arrived at the correct understanding of it. It means that we're supposed to dig. It means we're supposed to climb. It doesn't mean that we're supposed to take it as is. That is precisely the job of the unpacking of the organic information which Torah is and making that real. In Hebrew, the verb to understand is lavin. Today people say lahavin. That's not exactly correct. Lahavin is to make someone else understand. Lavin is to understand. In the word lahavin, we hear vin, ben, that is son. When we understand Torah correctly, that understanding, hahavana, understanding becomes the ben. Now, within the word ben, it should be understood that the expression bat mikol dor is, which means the daughter of every generation, is the same as the son. In other words, it's not just male and it's not just female. It's both, and it's not any one individual. We're talking about worlds. The Hebrew word bincha, which is translated as your son, or benech, your son to the feminine, bincha would be your son to the masculine, is equal to 552. 552 is also the gematria of the word hamitziut, which means reality. It is equal to kol basar, which means all flesh. And it is equal to olamot, which means worlds. The Mashiach is not one individual. It is worlds. The rabbis wanted people to think that the Mashiach is an individual in order to keep people in that floating Babylonian world of theirs. Let's look at the word Mashiach. There's a yud and a chet in that word, which is chet yud also, just reversing the letters, which is chai, which means living. The letters Shin and Mem happen to equal Sefer, which is book. Mashiach is the book which lives. It is the translation of that sperm, HaSefer. The word sperm would actually be Sfaram, which would be their books and also their frontier, their actualized frontier. That is what has to be translated into reality. So when that actually becomes alive, Mashiach, the Hasfa, the book, the frontier is alive, that is what's called Mashiach. Now the word chet, which means, chai, chet is the name of a letter. The word chai, which means living in the male singular, is also equal to the word behove, which means in the present. So Mashiach is the book that is living in the present. This is your present reality as you have understood it. If you haven't understood it correctly, if there has been a misconception, if there has been a corruption of conception, there is necessarily going to result a faulty, corrupted world in exactly the same way as if DNA is damaged. In fact, the reason why we are living in a world now in which there is damaged DNA is precisely because we have damaged so much of Torah. The rabbis damaged it when they wrote the Talmud and when they misinterpreted. Their misinterpretations then were translated, they're misinterpreted, and some of these misinterpretations, misconceptions were entirely intentional. Some they simply had just gotten to a lower level of understanding. So what they were understanding, ha'havana shelehem, the children, the progeny that their consciousness was producing, which are real worlds. These are not abstract concepts. This is your real holding. This is your real world. This is your real experience. This is the path that your feet are actually walking on. I do not learn Torah in abstract spiritual concepts. To me, it is more concrete than concrete. And this is the correct understanding of it. So the rabbis took their misunderstandings, translated them into Greek. From Greek it was translated into Latin. From Latin it was translated into German, into English. So you are reading a fourth generation translation of the rabbi's misinterpretation, and you think that's the gospel. Do you understand what that means in terms of the reality that you're living in? It means that you are in 4 levels of removal from reality. The Hebrew word for Hebrew, I've said this before, which is ivrit. The ayin is is aviv imi, which means my father and my mother, and brit, which is the covenant of my father and my mother. It is also sod brit, the secret of the covenant. And it is also ubar, that's the avav, that is an embryo, and yud tav is holy, is kadosh. That is the gematria of the word kadosh. So it is the holy embryo that only happens in Hebrew. The real holy conception, where God's word becomes a physical conception which is translated into reality. On that level, the consciousness is what you think Miriam was. Who you say Mary was is actually what the consciousness is. It is she that receives the divine sperm, becomes pregnant with it. In fact, Torah is also equal to the expression atara, you are pregnant And also et atzmi, with myself. Torah, if you're learning Torah correctly in Hebrew, you become pregnant with God itself, and those are the worlds that you create. Worlds that are actual transcriptions of the divine will in reality. All of this was mishmashed by the rabbis because they wanted the female aspect of this to be as ignored, as nullified. They give a little bit of what's called masfatayim, you know, like a little bit of lip service. Every once in a while they say, you know, women occupy the highest 2 levels of heaven. You know, in a second I'll tell you what heaven is. But they don't really teach it correctly what the role of the female is. Speaking of heaven, the Hebrew word for heaven is shamayim. Now the rabbis teach that means shamayim. There's water there. You know, they're always like putting things there. You know, some is there, then, away, up, you know, east, west. They don't want to live in the present. As hem lo chayim. Chai is to be bahove, in the present, which means that they're not in the present. They're not really living. This is why they're like demonic. Straight up. I'm talking straight to you. Shemayim has a mem and a yud in it, which, although it's may, which means the waters of, there is waters in it. That mem and yud is also a nun together. 40 and 10 becomes a nun, which is adama, which is land. So it's the water and land. And then the Shein and the Mem Sofit is indeed Shem, Sham, which they say is there, but it's not there. It is Olam Tzedek, which means a world of justice. This is the correct gematria. Another gematria of Shem is, or Sham, is Otek Shel, which means a copy of. Right? Our job is to become a copy of God's will in reality and bring that forth. So when I understand Torah correctly, that is to say that I become pregnant with the holy inception in my purity. I have to be pure. I have to have gone to the moral mikveh, to the moral, the ritual bath, to clean myself so that when I receive God's sperm, I am pure. I receive a pure inception. This is the Immaculate Conception. And then within my consciousness, this grows and becomes the actual land that I walk on. This is Hamitziut from. This is my land. This is my world. This is my reality. These are my paths. These are the things that I encounter. These are the opportunities that are given to me to meet people, to see animals, to is the moon still there? To look at the moon that's going down. So there's nothing abstract about Torah whatsoever. It is not spiritual. And when God talks about my son, B'ni, which by the way is also B'nai, it's also plural. It's not just one. It's the same letters. B'ni and B'nai, which is my son, my sons, which would also mean my sons and daughters. And Havanah, the understandings. This is the truth of Mashiach. HaMashiach, which means the Mashiach, which somebody might think it's one reality, one individual. HaMashiach, first of all, the letter He, which is the definite article, is equal to the expression Gamat, which means you too. So HaMashiach becomes you too are Mashiach, in the feminine singular. And And it's also equal to the expression Perush Nachon, which means correct interpretation. When a person learns, when a Jew learns Torah in Hebrew, in purity, with pure intentions, they become pregnant with God's pure inception, and that becomes their world. Females do this on a far higher level, more actual level than the males do. The men don't like it. Take it up with our Creator. That's just the way it is. And that tried to be nullified. The results of trying to nullify the female power of creation, of translation of the divine will into realities, were plastic realities. And that is precisely what's breaking up. In the exact same way that corrupted DNA is going to produce corrupted organs, corrupted tissues, corrupted organs, which are going to fall apart because they don't have integrity. They're not robust. In the exact same way, the corrupted understandings of Torah, especially if they were in translation from Hebrew into Greek, into Latin, and by the way, Martin Luther said that the Greek and Latin and every other translation after that, it goes from the Jews drinking directly out of the well to it being lower and lower sources of water, and he was absolutely right about that. He recognized that. Didn't prevent him from writing a book of pulp fiction, but he did understand what the problem was. The actual HaMashiach is the book of Torah, which is God's will, God's sperm, interpreted, made into healthy organs and being viable, living. That's what it means. What is happening in our world? Get back to what I was saying before I so rudely interrupted myself. The world's cracking up because it doesn't have the integrity. Every misunderstanding of Torah, every mistranslation of Torah, and especially the negative intentions. You know, we know your negative intentions. You think you've taken over Israel's place in God's bed. Forget that, darling. Israel's marriage to God is a Catholic marriage, in a sense. What I mean is that is the real eternal marriage. That was a funny one. That was a good one. Becomes corrupted realities. And those corrupted realities are now breaking up. There are earthquakes, right? The volcanoes, things are falling apart. There are sinkholes. Your earth is falling apart because you built it on corrupted interpretations. It's corrupted reality. It's fallen apart. It can't sustain. The lies that the rabbis and the Christians and the Muslims told about God became fault lines, became faulty earth, became turbulences, became unstable, and they're now falling apart. As soon as someone came into the world, it didn't have to be me, it could have been anyone who understood Torah correctly, would have automatically supplanted the misconception with the healthy conception. That's what actually happened. The correct conception kicked out the deformed embryos from the supernal womb and the one that is more viable is growing and overtaking all realities. In a minute I'm going to tell you that how to do this, because I don't want to be the only one who's capable of doing this. I specifically don't want to be the only one. But before I do that, I took a break to reload, and now look at the sunrise. I want you to see the perfection of the weather that surrounds me, because I learned Torah correctly. This is the land that I'm creating. This is my reality. The minute we learn Torah correctly, not the minute, but I mean it's a process, the way reality lines up around us is the birth of what we've understood, and it's peaceful, and it's stable, and it's calm, and it's beautiful, and all of the things that the world should be. And that's what I want for you. I do have a special relationship with HaShem. It's a privileged, intimate relationship. I can talk to God anytime and be received. I don't have to even knock on the door, although I do, because that's the correct thing to do. That's the relationship that we have. And that's what I want for you. And the way in which we get there is by talking to God directly, by establishing a relationship. You are never, ever going to be received into the palace and be allowed to take up residence there so long as you approach God with lies. If you call God Jesus, your prayers will be answered in a sense of as an act of charity, but not in the response of an intimate friend, because God will turn its face away from you in disgust. These bloody stories that you think are holy, or excuse me, it's an atrocity. And to attribute something like that to God, it's a terrible insult. It's a terrible defamation of God. You can't go to God with a defamation of God and say, you know, in the name of Jesus, God has a reaction. And those reactions become, when you make God nauseous, a volcano goes off. When you make God shudder, an earthquake happens. When you make God cry, a flood occurs. And you're doing that a lot. And it's happening en masse. And that's why nature is looking the way it is. This is not the tribulation before some rapture. This is the reality that you have inherited. In fact, it will only get worse. So long as you insist upon the hard shell of your erroneous Christian beliefs, God will keep cracking that shell. And that's going to mean more violent geographical events until you break and you accept that what you have been telling about God, your narrative, is a lie that is not sustainable. At this point, God's feelings are outraged enough so that God's outpouring of tears or floods. And there's volcanoes when you make God's heart bleed, when you make God angry, when you make God disgusted and God vomits. And when you make God recoil and disgust from you, earthquakes are happening. And if you look at Dutch Since's graphics, you can see that there are waves of earthquakes. It's a continuous earthquake. By insisting upon erroneous ideas, are making your realities break up. My reality is not breaking up, darlings. It's not happening here. And HARP wouldn't make it happen, and all of their gadgetry in the world would not be able to override my will. So don't go blaming and saying, well, it's not us, it's CERN, it's HARP, it's fracking, it's cracking. Those are all of just the vehicles, the excuses of how it's happening. If it wasn't that, it would be something else. God simply just doesn't want you in the creation anymore. You are being obliterated. There are various ways of making vessels that have become unkosher kosher. If it became unkosher by something being boiled in it that wasn't kosher, then it has to be boiled in order to get the unkosher out. So that's by water. If something has been baked in it or fried in it that isn't kosher, even speaking about these things upsets me, then it has to be purified by fire. God is quite literally making the unkosher world that you have made with your abominations kosher by fire and by water. That's the way it's done. And if you don't give up these unkosher ideas of Christianity and Islam, and your worlds are going to go. You won't be tolerated in the creation anymore. You're getting warning after warning after warning. This is not the tribulation before the rapture. This is the tribulation before God's just had a belly full of you and says, you know what? Just plow them under. So my suggestion to you, don't take my word for it. Go to God without calling him Jesus, without without all kinds of corrupted phrases from the Quran. Just talk to God directly and say, I don't know, maybe that old lady in Sfat is crazy, maybe she knows what she's talking about, but I am open to receiving the truth in my way. I'm not coming to you, God, with any kind of conditions that you have to fulfill for me. I'm not calling you any names. I'm not giving you any descriptions. I'm not telling you any narratives about who you are. I'm coming to you just honestly and saying, I want to merit to participate in this beautiful creation, and I will do as my heart says, and your heart will begin to talk to you in a way that you will know is real. The moments of your heart will be very familiar to you, and you will know that you arrived. And once that heart becomes pure, it all purifies, because what you're thinking and feeling at the moment that the blood is in your heart, which is then going to flow into your body, those feelings and thoughts are taken along with it, and they feed your entire body, including the conjunctiva in your eyes. Now, as thin as the conjunctiva are, they are very rich in blood vessels. So it's very, very important in the conjunctiva, in the eyes, that the blood that flowed out of your heart is pure. Because if it's not pure, if there are impurities of erroneous ideas and negative emotions and hating on others and thinking that you're superior to others and having ill intentions toward others, the blood that travels from the heart that felt that into your eyes, when you look through that, it looks like hard, massive structures. The cities that you're seeing, those massive buildings and the absorbed materials and the concrete and the hardness and all of that, what you're actually seeing is the little impurities in those tiny little conjunctiva projected out there into reality, because the blood wasn't pure when it flowed from your heart. When you look through these tiny little grains of impurity and they're projected out there, they look like megalopoli. If the intentions in your heart were good, when those materials would flow out from your heart into your conjunctiva, then you would see something that looks like this. I can actually show you what my eyes see. What my eyes create, I can show you because it's real. I cannot show you a hallucination. But I can show you, and there are pictures on my Facebook page, videos day after day after day of absolutely perfected weather, magnificent scenery, beautiful birds that fly in the sky, all of this, simply because I meditate on as much love as I can. I'm not perfect. You don't have to be perfect. The earth can correct for a certain amount of imperfection. The waters flow, it fills in the gaps, the earth shifts a little bit, so small faults can be corrected. It's the massive mistakes and the collective mistakes that begin to become untenable, and there's so much instability that's introduced into Earth, into the system, that it can't contain itself anymore. So, folks, if you want to have your version of what I have, days of peace and beauty and beautiful sunrises that become beautiful days, that become interesting events, that turn into velvet evening and then into the dark of night and the stars, and it magnificently beautiful, and the flowers that grow around me that I see, that it all starts in the heart. You can create the same realities for yourself, and I want that for you. It's important for me to be part of a humanity that's all experiencing that. I don't want an exclusive on God. I want you to have this too. Thank you for listening. And maybe I should have mentioned that my name is Doreen Ellen Bell Dotan, and I live in Sfat in Israel. Thank you for listening. I know this has been a long video.